Good morning. This is Ron. It is Monday, June the 4th. Welcome to Story Time. Thank you. And again, this is Ron. You're the only host in the United States of America that's a true conservative. So, one of the things that I've noticed about in as a customer dealing with various workplaces is that the prevalence of the attitude among workers that it's a very lackadaisical, very relaxed, very informal attitude among workers in McDonald's, the gym I go to, that kind of thing. And it seems to me that American counterculture is dominating in this respect, in that what American counterculture has been seeking to do, because again, if you want to change the politics of a particular area, region, state, country, then the best way to do it is to change the culture. And the change in culture here is from the idea that a place of business is there to create value for its customers, and that the employees are there to help the business do that. And to the degree that an employee succeeds in helping to create value is the degree to which the employee is valued. To the degree that the employee detracts from that is the degree to which the employee is disvalued or not valued, and is likely to get terminated. But the American counterculture wants it to go the other way, where workplaces become employee centered. And so they become the theory and attitude of the employees is, this is a place for me to make money. This is a place for me to get benefits, particularly medical benefits. This is a place for me to fulfill myself. And this is, in other words, this is a business that was created for me, and is simply not true. And if you have a bunch of employees, you're a business person, and you have a bunch of employees who have that kind of an attitude, it seems to me that you're going to have a very tough time staying in business, because that kind of attitude is going to be brought to the customers. The customers are going to come second or third or fourth or whatever, and that's going to be noticeable to the customers. Now, not all businesses are doing this, and that's one of the great things about competition, is that those that recognize this trend and see it as a negative are going to be able to take advantage of that by insisting that their employees remain centered on customer service and making the customers happy. And they're going to gain market share, and they're going to have bigger profits than the companies that do it the other way around. But make no mistake, American counterculture is attempting to transform the workplace and make it a place for to, instead of, again, trying to create value for customers, it's going to be a place to try to create value for employees. So, anyways, when I come back, I'm going to be reading from Ayn Rand's Playboy interview from 1964. Okay, thank you very much. And this is the Playboy interview of Ayn Rand from 1964 that I stumbled across, and it's a lot of gold. It shows how easy it is, really, for anybody to go wrong, for an interviewer to be able to subtly shift the conversation to go from being an interview to being a debate, from shifting the focus of the interview from one thing to another. Because again, as an interviewee, you think the idea is for you to be passive, to walk in, sit, wait for them to ask questions, and answer the questions to the best of your ability. But if you're mentally active, then you can defeat the interviewer's attempts to go ahead and try to subvert the interview, for lack of a better term. So, in this particular case, does this mean, in your view, as a Playboy, asking Ayn Rand, does this mean, in your view, that sex should only involve only married partners? Rand, not necessarily. What sex should involve is a very serious relationship. Whether that relationship should or should not become a marriage is a question which depends on the circumstances and the context of the two persons' lives. I consider marriage a very important institution, but it is important when and if two people have found the person with whom they wish to spend the rest of their lives. A question of which no man or woman can be automatically certain. When one is certain that one's choice is final, their marriage is, of course, a desirable state. But this does not mean that any relationship based on less than total certainty is improper. I think the question of an affair or a marriage depends on the knowledge and the position of the two persons involved and should be left up to them. Either is moral, providing only that both parties take the relationship seriously and that it is based on values. And so I'm going to comment real quickly here, and she's wrong. Because again, what Ayn Rand fails to do, she fails to make the presumption for the status quo. What is the status quo in our society? It is that sex is for marriage, a union between two people is marriage oriented. Period. That sex outside marriage, whether it is premarital or extramarital, is wrong, sinful, immoral, unethical, but wrong. And that's the place you make the start. So when he had asked, should this be a place or should sex only be in marriage, her answer should have been yes. That's the way it should be, because that's the way it is. And we'll make a change if and when there's an obvious case for change. And there is no obvious case for change from that idea. To do anything else, to make a presumption for something else, is to be idealistic. As you can either make the presumption for the status quo or you can make the presumption for something different, so for i.e. change. And that's exactly what Ayn Rand does. She makes the presumption for a standard that doesn't exist. It's actually, in a way, it's her own personal standard. So then she is using a subjective metaphysics, and that's equally wrong. Metaphysics means that you can't have your cake and eat it too, and that's that. It's not possible for me to have my cake and eat it too, and you can't have your cake and eat it too. Doesn't work that way. You can't have your cake and eat it too, and that's for everybody. And so she's not, in other words, being objective. And the reason she's not being objective is because she's created her own philosophy. So the question is asked in that context. In your opinion, in the doctrine of your philosophy, should marriage be within the strictly inside of marriage, or can it be extramarital? And that's where she goes wrong. If she hadn't bothered to create her own philosophy and just consider herself a philosopher who's looking for the truth, she wouldn't have made this mistake. Playboy, as one who champions the cause of enlightened self-interest, how do you feel about dedicating one's life to hedonistic self-gratification? Rand, I'm profoundly opposed to the philosophy of hedonism. Hedonism is the doctrine which holds that the good is whatever gives you pleasure, and therefore pleasure is the standard of morality. Objectivism holds that the good must be defined by a rational standard of value, that pleasure is not a first cause, but only a consequence, that only the pleasure which proceeds from a rational value judgment can be regarded as moral, that pleasure, as such, is not a guide to action nor a standard of morality. To say that pleasure should be the standard of morality simply means that whatever values you happen to have chosen consciously or subconsciously, rationally or irrationally, are right and moral. This means that you are to be guided by chance feelings, emotions, and whims, not by your mind. My philosophy is the opposite of hedonism. I hold that one cannot achieve happiness by random, arbitrary, or subjective means. One can achieve happiness only on the basis of rational values. By rational values, I do not mean anything that a man may arbitrarily or blindly declare to be rational. It is the province of morality, of the science of ethics, to define for men what is a rational standard and what are the rational values to pursue. And again, she goes wrong here because she keeps talking about her philosophy. There is no such thing. There's no such thing as my philosophy, your philosophy, their philosophy. The other trap that you run into here is from the standpoint that when you go and you make the presumption for change, and you become idealistic, you're no longer realistic. Now, what happens is that you're in competition with other forms of idealism. You're in competition with libertarianism. You're in competition with religious conservatism. You're in competition with socialism. And so socialism is going to win that battle because socialism goes out and says to the prospective member, okay, so to all these people that are thinking, especially young people, 17, 18 years old, that are thinking about what kind of political philosophy they wish to follow, is saying, hey, follow us because we are going to produce paradise. And the paradise we're going to produce is based on the word yes. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want, and we will help you get there, help you get it. If you want abortion on demand, yes. If you want to be able to use drugs whenever you want to, absolutely. And so you objectivism in this particular case. Let's look at this. So she's profoundly opposed to hedonism and those things that feel good, where socialism says yes to hedonism. So any philosophy or philosophical theory that is idealistic, that doesn't say yes to everything, is at a disadvantage as compared to socialism. It's like I've said with conservatism. Religious conservatism is then going to go to people and say, well, we've got a paradise too, but ours is a religious conservatism paradise. And our religious conservatism paradise says you can't eat meat on Friday, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other thing, you can't. Now, if you're an 18-year-old, and on the one hand you've got the philosophy that says do whatever you want, we'll back and support it, we'll tax whomever we have to tax in order for you to get free education or free health care, whatever, or the philosophy that says no, you sorry, can't do this, can't do that. You want an abortion? Forget about it. You want to be a promiscuous? No way. You want free health care? No. You better earn it. Which is going to sound better to me as an 18-year-old? Which sounds more like paradise? The first one, of course. So I'm going to have a tendency to want to go left. So you're defeating yourself politically, and Ayn Rand is defeating herself politically by, again, putting herself in a position to compete directly with socialism and then turning around and telling people, well, no, our paradise is going to mean that you're going to have to engage in various forms of self-sacrifice. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other thing. Playboy, you have said that the kind of man who spends his time running after women is a man who despises himself. Would you elaborate? Rand, this type of man is reversing cause and effect in regard to sex. Sex is an expression of man's self-esteem, of his own self-value, but the man who does not value himself tries to reverse this process. He tries to derive his self-esteem from his sexual conquests, which cannot be done. He cannot acquire his own value from the number of women who regard him as valuable, yet that is the hopeless thing which he attempts. So again, here's Ayn Rand being a scold, announcing to all, and by the way, this is Playboy magazine, which is going to be read by 18 to 25-year-old men. And so, but 18 to 25-year-old men. And so Ayn Rand is saying to this population that, being a scold, no, you're not going to be able to be promiscuous because in my philosophy, if my philosophy wins out, none of you 18 to 25-year-olds are going to be able to go out every weekend and sow your wild oats. It's so she becomes actually, in a manner of speaking, conservative here, or at least what is considered traditionally conservative, in which the conservatives become nags and scolds and tell people, what they can or cannot do, or especially what it is that they can't do. And and you're saying you're flying right in the face of a Playboy audience. And the question before, again, was the same thing. Playboy's hedonistic. There's little doubt about that. And so when they're asking the question about hedonism, basically what they're asking about is this a philosophy that our audience is going to be interested in or want to maybe even give up the Playboy lifestyle and Playboy magazine for. And she quickly, of course, lets them know, no, that's not going to be happening. So again, if she had been objective about this, the better way to have answered this is the kind of man who spends his time running after women is a man who despises himself. Would you elaborate? And I don't know if he despises himself or not. That's a psychological assessment for a psychologist. That would have been a better answer. And saying that promiscuity is wrong because sex outside of marriage is wrong. And why? Because that's the way it is. That's the way we've been doing things since in this country since its founding. Since its founding, promiscuity has been frowned upon, and there's a lot of good reasons for it. Sexual disease for one thing, and unwanted pregnancies for another. You wouldn't need abortion if people refused to be promiscuous. And so you're stating that as a matter of fact and as a matter of reality rather than as a matter of mere opinion. So, and she would have done much better to answer it that way. You attack the idea that sex is impervious to reason, but isn't sex a non rational biological instinct? No, to begin with, man does not possess any instincts. Physically, sex is merely a capacity, but how a man will exercise the capacity and whom he will find attractive depends on his standard of value. It depends on his premises, which he may hold consciously or subconsciously, and which determine his choices. It is in this manner that his philosophy directs his sex life. She was perfect in that answer. This is an answer where she got it right, except for the last sentence where it says his philosophy. Now, she should have said the philosophical theory that directs his sex life. But again, she presents the answer in an objective way rather than having a, in my opinion, kind of answer. So, in this particular instance, she hit it right on the button. Okay, so when I come back, I'm going to finish up with a few jokes from the New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book. Thank you. And now I'm going to be reading a few quips from the New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book by Jim Peach. A nun dies and goes to heaven. St. Peter says to her, I'm sure you've led a virtuous life, sister, but before I can let you into heaven, you must answer one question. What, asks St. Peter, were Eve's first words to Adam? Boy, says the nun, that's a hard one. That's right, says St. Peter, and the pearly gates open wide. It is World War II, and a group of new recruits is going through basic training. Unfortunately, when the rifles are handed out, the supply runs out, and so one of the soldiers doesn't get a rifle. The sergeant gives the man a broomstick instead and tells him, when you need to shoot, just point this and say bangity bangity bang. The man feels a little uneasy about it and becomes even more disconcerted when they hand out bayonets, and he doesn't get one of those either. Once again, the sergeant takes him aside. If you get into hand-to-hand combat, says the sergeant, tying a carrot onto the end of this broomstick, just poke the enemy with this and say stabbity, stabbity, stab. Soldier feels quite nervous about all this, but he figures the sergeant knows what he's doing. So the company shipped overseas and starts to see some action. During the first battle, a soldier with a broomstick sees a few German soldiers running towards his position. He points a broomstick at them and says, bangity, bangity, bang. He is amazed when they all fall down. Wow, he says to himself, it really works. Suddenly, a German soldier jumps out from behind a nearby tree. Immediately, the American pokes him with the carrot and says, stabbity, stabbity, stab. The German soldier falls dead at his feet. This is great, the American says to himself. Just then, another German starts approaching, so he points his broomstick and says, bangity, bangity, bang. But the German just keeps on coming. After trying to shoot him a few more times, the German gets closer and closer, so the American says, stabbity, stabbity, stab. But the German just keeps on coming. Finally, the German knocks the American down and walks over him. As the American is lying on his back being trampled, he hears the German saying, tankety, tankety, tank. And on that note, we conclude another episode of Story Time. And until next time, Thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great day.